we're ready to do our wrap-up session for this afternoon. And appropriately, the wrap-up session is about some overarching recommendations that span the three contexts. They're important because incidental findings don't just occur in the clinical research and DTC context, and they're not just generated by large-scale genetic sequencing, imaging, and the testing of biological specimens. We take to heart where we do not think there is genetic exceptionalism. We really, these are issues that span not only the three contexts, but other contexts as well. So the principles and duties we discuss here have broad ethical applications. An example that I want to put before you as we engage in this overarching discussion is from the blood and biologics field in the context of blood donation. As everyone knows, when you donate blood, that blood is screened for some infectious diseases such as HIV. If, for example, it's discovered that the donor is HIV positive, the donor is notified because of the critical health implications of that information. But most importantly, or to protect the safety of the nation's blood supply, the donor does not have an opportunity to opt out of learning this information. There are other findings, however, such as the sickle cell trait, that do not raise the same concerns regarding the safety of the nation's blood supply, as they would not have a detrimental effect on most recipients, but they can be incidentally discovered, or they can be, as we could now say, a secondary finding, right? And have important reproductive and or social implications for the donor. Some of these implications could be positive, others potentially less so. So practitioners, that is discovering the sickle cell, how you are on sickle cell, could go either way, right? So the practitioners in these other contexts, for example, in the context of public health, are faced with similar decisions about whether various findings should be returned. And I want us to keep in mind the type of real-life situations that healthcare professionals face every day, because as the nation's Bioethics Commission, we want to make sure that our ethical deliberations are as applicable and practical as possible so that they can be used in as many of the healthcare contexts and by as many of healthcare professionals as might find them helpful. So, keeping practical applications in mind, I'd like to begin this overarching discussion with noting the reoccurring theme of a need for additional empirical research in this important field. While we've heard presentations regarding some very interesting work that's being currently undertaken, to date, relatively little data have been published focused on the management of incidental findings generally, and almost none in the clinical or DTC context. And we thank those who presented us with data in these contexts from their particular small or not so small operations, but almost none of these data have been published in peer review journals in a way that we could take as impartial data. Certainly, any recommendations regarding the best practices for management of incidental findings in any context should be supported by empirical data, including empirical data about recipient preferences. Therefore, we should consider recommending further funding for scholarship and research into the types of incidental findings that arise from various modalities, the frequency of incidental findings, and the potential benefits and harms of identifying, disclosing, and treating incidental findings. That is and I'll read you a potential recommendation, which basically encapsulates what would apply to all of the settings. Federal agencies such as the National Institutes of Health and other interested private and public entities should continue to fund research concerning the discovery and disclosure of incidental and secondary findings. This research should include continuing efforts to identify the types of incidental and secondary findings that arise from various modalities, the frequency of these findings, and the potential benefits and harms of identifying, disclosing, and treating incidental and secondary findings. Research should also ascertain the preferences of practitioners and potential recipients concerning the discovery and disclosure of these findings. So that's one overarching recommendation. I'm going to run through all of them and then open it up for discussion. Another closely related topic is that insofar as our commission encourages professional and institutional guidelines be developed in the clinical research and direct-to-consumer context, these too should be based on both empirical evidence and the applicable ethical principles. Professional guidelines should incorporate the best available ethical thinking as well as evidence regarding the ways in which practitioners should anticipate, interpret, and respond to these findings. And here's a potential language for such a recommendation. Professional institutional guidelines that set forth best practices for managing incidental and secondary findings should be based on ethical principles and empirical evidence. These guidelines should incorporate the best available evidence regarding the ways in which practitioners should anticipate, interpret, and respond to these findings. To the extent possible, rigorous evidentiary standards should be developed and shared across contexts. So that's second, overarching. Third area that is worthy of our consideration, and in all of these, I'm not asking for, we can pass around wordsmithing, but if there are some substantive agreement or some significant, modifications or discussion that you want to have here. Third area is for practitioners to establish a plan or procedure for managing these findings before the situation presents itself. And that is compatible, that is not only compatible, it's necessary for really meaningful autonomous decisions and professional responsibility. It's the way of bringing professional responsibility together with individual autonomy is to have a plan and discuss a plan ahead of time. So here's a potential language. Practitioners, including clinicians, researchers, and direct-to-consumer companies, should have protocols in place regarding the possible discovery, management, and return of incidental and secondary findings generated by their work. Practitioners should educate patients, participants, and consumers of tests and procedures with a high likelihood of generating incidental or secondary findings about this possibility, and inform them of how the finding will be handled before tests or procedures are conducted, and also inform them of the reasoning behind these procedural choices. So that's another overarching. Last but not least, and consonant with the principle of democratic deliberation, I wanted to bring up the importance of educating stakeholders regarding incidental and secondary findings. And this we have talked about frequently today across these contexts, and includes educating practitioners about their obligations with regard to these findings, as well as educating the public so they can make more informed decisions about whether to undergo procedures and tests that might produce such findings. And here's a potential language for your consideration. I like the parsimony of this. Educational materials should be prepared to inform all stakeholders, including practitioners and potential recipients, about the ethical, practical, and legal concerns raised by incidental and secondary findings. And those are the overarching. I want to just make one overarching comment about these overarching recommendations. I think they're important to have because they tie together the context, the three contexts, and include some other contexts that are not naturally seen under clinical research and DTC, such as public health. But standing alone, they'd be far too general. They just really point out that there is not a unified field theory here. By the way, science doesn't have a unified field theory, so we should not expect to. But that there are some common themes which, in the specific context, we can be more specific in our recommendations. So we're notably general here because the DTC context requires more particular, different recommendations than research, than clinical. But I do think, and I'm asking the commission members if you agree or disagree, I do think it's helpful to have these overarching recommendations to call out the unifying themes here. And with that overarching comment about the overarching comments, I will open it up for members' reaction and discussion. Anita.
First, thank you for these. I think that they're quite helpful and provide a nice framing of the issues overall. I have one friendly addition and one question. So the institutional guidelines, I think, is incredibly helpful, and the few contexts in which we've seen that happen have been instructive both in our deliberations and I think for communities more generally. Based on what we've heard, and I think implicit in what you said, it would be useful for institutional guidelines also to take into account the economic impact of incidental findings and to consider the implications of doing so. So that's just a friendly amendment, which is, I would think it'd be helpful to specify that.
So accepted.
Great. And then the last one, which is educating stakeholders, the way you said it doesn't specify to whom we're directing that particular recommendation. And I think, if we look at, what the staff has been helping in developing wonderful educational materials alongside our reports, I would imagine this might be a place in which such materials could be used, but providing, I think, some direction as to whom we think that is directed toward and who we're inviting to do so would be helpful. So if you had thoughts about that, to whom we're directing that, I think we'd be more likely to see actionable results.
Yeah, I think we could be more specific, at least in the preface to the recommendation. I mean, all stakeholders is meant to be that there are many different stakeholders here, but we could be more specific in leading up to this about the different stakeholders who exist. That is, the stakeholders, everybody is a stakeholder in this. I mean, so we should basically say, prepared to inform everyone about, because really everybody is a stakeholder here. But we ought to say in the preface to this, the different roles that individuals have as stakeholders.
Nita, did you imagine also the questions about who would be charged with doing the education?
Okay.
Which is, I agree that for each of the different stakeholders it'd be useful to have educational materials, but who we're charging with the development of educational materials about LC concerns would be useful.
Good. So I think this is a case where we may take some responsibility as a bioethics commission on behalf of ourselves and future bioethics commissions to say, bioethics commissions should take on some of this responsibility in preparing or guiding giving some guidance for the preparation of educational materials. I mean, I'm not saying we're the primary, bioethics commissions are the primary educators here, but we ought to be, I like the idea of being specific but not exhaustive about who might be particularly competent and institutionally well situated to be an educator in this realm. I open it up to commission members to give some ideas about what institutions we should call out here in our discussion, not necessarily in this succinct recommendation, but in the discussion, the short discussion leading up to it.
Just another hopefully friendly amendment to the first recommendation to make sure there's enough room within there for comparative effectiveness of broad versus focused testing, and I think that would apply across the settings actually. And it seemed like it was only sort of, I'm not sure the language was broad enough to capture that, and I think we want to make sure that that sort of testing is also part of what we're recommending. So.
I take that as another friendly amendment, yes.
And
Addition,
then,
actually.
Yeah, right. And then, with respect to just your latter question, are you thinking about groups like the Association of American Medical Colleges or people like that who would be helpful?
Yeah.
So that's one sort of, at least from the clinical perspective, we called for that sort of education of clinicians, and AAMC might be a place to start.
Exactly,
instance,
exactly. And I think if we could ask for any public input on who might be institutions that the public looks to towards this, and ask the commission members to give some input after this meeting on the specific organizations and institutions who are productively engaged in education and should take this in particular on, because it is a very important area for patients, consumers, and research subjects. And it turns out for in public health, it also comes up. Anita.
So I mentioned the Federal Trade Commission earlier. I'm a huge fan of the Federal Trade Commission because they've done such a great job with educating the public around issues of privacy, identity theft, and other issues that relate to the new economy and to the information age. And they have, for example, special web pages for children about protecting their privacy. It seems like the FTC would be a real good organization or sort of organ of government to more deeply involve in these issues, especially as they do relate to direct-to-consumer. Because, again, we want to try to make sure that to the extent that people are advertising products of this sort to the general public, that they're doing so in a clear, fair, and lawful manner. So I just would strongly recommend the FTC be, they're already engaged, but I'd like to see them even more engaged.
So could I ask Christine or anybody else who knows whether we should call out the FDA, because it seems to me that what the FDA doesn't regulate, because it can't and shouldn't regulate everything, it can actually provide an education, educate people about why they regulate some things and not others, and what consumers can do to inform themselves about the effects of non-regulated projects.
And I just want,
Is
Amy,
that-
because you said FDA, and I was talking about FTC. You
No, I
okay, so
I
that
accepted
together,
your
right?
FTC,
Okay, so
but
FDA has its realm, and FTC
they have
might
totally
its
different
realm.
realms.
Yeah,
So
right, thanks.
I thought
Okay.
yours was, I was just accepting yours,
Thank
but I
you.
was then thinking of this other realm of whether the things that agencies don't regulate but are continually called upon to regulate. That's why I think the FDA is continually called to regulate things that it doesn't have either the power or the the ethical responsibility, to regulate. I would think that, and I do think it does this in some extent, but in the case of, I wonder if they would want and would be good at taking on some of this educational role. I don't know. I really ask it as a question.
It's
Yeah,
not,
I
yeah, education is not a traditional role of the FDA,
Okay.
although
So-
you would think they would at least feel compelled to explain what they're doing. So, I mean, if that's,
So let me just say that education, sitting here in an educational institution, I think it's important to explain that when we make a call for education here, we're not just talking about traditional educational institutions. I know you weren't suggesting that, but one way that governmental institutions educate, one very central way, is giving reasons for the things they do and do not do. And in that regard, even though courts, the judicial system is often seen as a less accountable institution because many judges are not elected, it is very accountable in another way, that it gives reasons for its decisions. And that is very directly educational, and indirectly it provides educational materials. So that's why I thought of asking government agencies that are not primarily educational to give some reasons that the public could know why they do or do not.
I think that's a great idea.
Okay.
Look, there may also be, I don't know, we're thinking about education also of clinicians and researchers. There are other organizations that, have that as their main mission.
So, yeah.
CMS.
Yeah,
Well, not
so we
all-
could,
Even private organizations too, that do
Oh, yeah.
mostly education of researchers.
Good. good.
Good.
Okay, Barbara,
Sorry, the ACGME, the
Yeah.
accreditation for the graduate
good.
medical residents.
Okay. Are there any other reactions? Because we will adjourn as soon as this, we'll wrap it up, but I don't want to, if anybody has anything, if anybody in the audience has any questions or comments, now's the time. Okay. We have overarching, the draft of overarching recommendations, and we are done for today. And it's been incredibly productive. I really thank the speakers. I thank the audience. We've got, as you could tell, you generated some really good questions and revisions in our thinking. As always, I invite anyone to submit comments on our website, bioethics.gov. And I want to thank my terrific Vice Chair, Jim Wagner, and the Commission members. So thank you very, very much for carrying us forward.
Right back at you.
Okay, thanks. We are adjourned for the day. We begin tomorrow at 9 o'clock. Thank you all very much.